why we're actually doing this forum online. And I think the subject matter we're trying to talk about this evening, what might climate change mean to the AONB and Stour Valley, is a bit of a clue as to why we're doing this on Teams. We are trying, obviously, to reduce our amount of time that we spend travelling around in our cars and the ensuing use of power and that sort of thing. So that's the reason behind that. I mean, I do love to have face-to-face meetings. It's very important that we do get back to that. But in the circumstances, I think it's appropriate that we meet this way. I think the other thing I really need to say in the introduction is that we are endeavouring to use the question and answer system in your box above. It's above the screen on my screen anyway. Question answer bit there to ask any questions or anything you may have of the speakers. And then the team who are pen poised will in fact look through those questions you pose and collate them, and we'll come back to the speakers later on and put those questions to them. So if you can do that, please, that would be very helpful. As you can see, all the microphones and cameras are otherwise offline. I think there's nothing else I really need to say in the way of housekeeping, as it were. So let's crack on with the forum. And our first speaker is Fiona Wells. I've been pleased to be able to meet Fiona several times recently, and she is, as many of you will know, the facilitator of the Stour Valley Farmer Cluster, which is an incredibly successful group that has done very much in the AONB by encouraging the farming community not just to do what they should be doing, producing our food requirements, but to deliver many environmental gains. It's very exciting work going on there, and I'm delighted to meet them so often and to see what they are actually doing. So Fiona will be sharing her knowledge that she's gained over her many years' experience in the sector, and she's presenting a presentation of her views on farming and the environment that I think we will find enlightening. So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I'm not the most proficient with technology, so bear with me whilst I just load up my presentation, which I have to say a big thank you to Tom Fairbrother from the AONB team, who's been incredibly helpful in getting me a little bit technologically advanced. So can you just confirm that you can see the screen, because my presentation's gone to full screen for me?
Fiona, we can see the screen.
Great, thank you. So thank you very much for this invitation to talk to the group this evening. I'm going to give a perspective from the farmers that I work with in the Stour Valley Farmer Cluster, rather than a broader overview of agricultural policy in general, because as this slide perhaps demonstrates, at the moment it's an incredibly confusing picture, really. And if any of us really knew where we're going in agriculture over the next 5 to 10 years, then well, that would be a brilliant thing. So in terms of what's shaping agricultural perspectives and production at the moment, we've got the 25-year environment plan, which was produced in about 2018, 2019, and that's shaping things like water quality, air quality, biodiversity, and the way forward to enhance and protect our landscapes and our natural resources. On top of that, with the national parks and the AONBs, we have the landscapes review, which is also called the Glover report, which also helps to shape how we in the protected landscapes might help to deliver some of these aspects that we all need to be looking at. We've then got, in terms of agriculture across England, the Agriculture Act, which came into being in 2020, and then last year the Environment Act came into being as well. So all of those factors are starting to shape where we're going into the future. what we do know is that the direction is very much looking at our natural resources. We've got a legacy of food production that has intensified since the middle of the 20th century. But in fact, it's quite interesting that our self-sufficiency in food has actually decreased somewhat. So back in the sorry, I just couldn't see my figures just there for a minute. So our current self-sufficiency is about 62%. Back in 1991, it was actually about 75%. And in part, that reflects our changing diets and our global food market and how we've changed what we eat slightly. But it also reflects what's coming along the line really for us all is that soil health and water quality and the health of our rivers and streams and seas is really something that's got to rise up the agenda, because without that, then we can't maintain and increase our self-sufficiency and our productivity. So that's very much the future agenda. And you may well have heard about the expression public value for public goods and delivery of ecosystem services. Well, what does that mean? It means our natural environment that can deliver the healthy soils, the clean air, and the healthy water. Linked into this and directly affecting agriculture is changes in the way agricultural subsidies are being rolled out. So the current basic farm payment system, which is a legacy of CAP reform and our being in Europe, is being phased out so that by 2027, farmers will no longer be supported to produce subsidized food in effect. And that's been a phased reduction year on year, with the first reduction last year. This year, we're looking at a 20 to 35% reduction in payments, and it varies according to, it's a payment that's linked to the area of land that you're actively farming, and the amount of reduction depends on the area that you're claiming. So next year, everybody's going to be seeing a 50 to 65% reduction. Now, as a back of the envelope calculation, I looked at this. What does that mean for the AOMB? And across the AOMB farms, that's not the farmer cluster, which is wider, and I'll come on to that in a minute. We're looking at a reduction over the next 3 years, 21 to 2024, of about $1 million in payments coming into farms. And that's going to have a direct effect on the way we farm, on employment, and on looking at efficiency and food production. The decreasing funds are going to be redirected. There's agri-environment schemes have been on the table and widely taken up over probably about the last 30 years. I've been working in farm conservation for about 30, 35 years. And agri-environment schemes have been there in one form or another. That's where the funds are going to be redirected. And it's going to be looking at sustainable farm incentive and environmental land management, which is expected to be rolled out in about 2024. It may be a little later, I suspect, because of the pandemic and issues with working up schemes. So that gives you a just kind of very broad overview of what's happening in England, and I thought it would be quite useful to then bring that down to what's happening in the farmer cluster. And for those of you that haven't come across the farmer cluster, What I'm going to do is just give you a very brief overview of what clusters are, what the farmer cluster is doing, and particularly what we're doing in relation to climate change, because the farmers that I work with do take it incredibly seriously and want to be at the forefront of addressing it in the way that they can. So farmer clusters are a relatively new concept, and it's about getting farmers to work together. Started in 2013 with 5 pilot projects under Natural England auspices. The Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust who do a lot of research into farmland conservation and habitats and wildlife, support and host the website for all farmer clusters, and they held their first conference in 2017. Major Carol Gurney, who farms at Higham, started the cluster for the Stour Valley with a small group, and then passed the leadership on to Geoffrey Probert, who many of you, I'm sure, know both of those farmers, who farms in Bures. And so I would say the Stour Valley Farmer Cluster really began to grow across the AONB and the immediate area around it from 2019 onwards. So we're now a group of about 33 farmers covering about 9,000 hectares, from Twinstead in the west, across to Lawford, up to Shelley, Assington, and down into North Essex as well, Langham, and across that area, Boxted. Nationally, there's about 500,000 hectares under farmer groups management, and in Norfolk and Suffolk, we've now got 13 farmer clusters, and we're also we meet 4 times a year and just look at supporting each other and being aware of what each cluster is doing. Of course, all our landscapes are slightly different. So we have different habitat priorities, different wildlife priorities, but it's all about encouraging farmers to work together. So this is just a broad map that gives you an idea of the area covered. You can see the white space. We haven't got every farmer in the cluster. The red boundary is the Dedham Vale AONB and the main rivers coming through. Collectively, we're farming about 4,500 hectares of arable, producing wheat, barley, for some of it's for bread making, biscuit making, barley for malting, some of it will be for animal feed, some of it will go for export. Oilseed rape is an important crop in the rotation, and increasingly so under the current situation, where we've been hearing about problems with sunflower oil. Oilseed rape oil is an important replacement for that. Potatoes and onions are also an important crop within the area. Permanent pasture with cattle and sheep grazing. You've got 860 hectares of woodland and 84 ponds. Farmers are, most of them are already in an agri-environment scheme of some description or another. So they're growing specific crops for wildlife alongside their food production. So it's areas of seed for wintering birds, areas of pollen and nectar to increase resources for invertebrates during the spring and summer months, and sort of tussocky margins for small mammals and invertebrates. So a range of habitats. In terms of what we're doing for climate change, we started in 2021. We had a pilot project that was supported by the Dedham Vale AONB team through DEFRA funding to look at farm carbon accounting. Carbon trading as yet is a completely unregulated market. It's uncertain, and we don't exactly know where it's going. But the environment plan commits us to net zero by 2050, but increasingly that data is coming closer to us. So the National Farmers Union are looking at agriculture being net zero by 2040. So that doesn't mean that every farm in the country is going to be able to be net zero. It's not. But the agricultural business as an overview, as a whole, will be looking to be net zero by that time. And increasingly, producers, supply chains, so people like, I don't know, McCain Chips or McDonald's or Waitrose or Marks and Spencer's, they're beginning to want their farmers who supply into their supply chain to be aware and to be working towards net zero. DEFRA are working on a farm carbon accounting tool, but note it's working on it, it's not produced yet. So the farmers in the cluster want to be ahead of that. And so we did a project with one farm in 2021 alongside the Farm Carbon Toolkit to have a look at what the farm carbon balance was for that one farm. And that was a really successful project. So we used that, and we've now got 9 farmers. So that's roughly a third of our farmer members who are being funded through the FIPL programme, through the Dedham Vale AOMB, to do their own farm carbon accounting. And this is a process whereby you look at all your inputs over a 12-month period, and that's everything from fuel to fertilizer to business-related trips, to if you're using biosolids or digestate that are coming into the farm, and then balancing that against your natural capital resources. So those are your woodland, your hedges, grass margin, permanent pasture, your soil health, and to assess what the balance is. So our pilot project in 2021, they found that their balance was around 10 tonnes in the negative. And we're going to look where the 9 farms are, and then that information will be used by the Farm Carbon Toolkit, who have done overarching reviews for several other AOMBs, High Weald in Kent and the Malvern Hills, to look at, to extrapolate that data. And so we can begin to have an idea of where we are in terms of the agricultural impact on inputs and sequestration for the AOMB geographic area, and also for the wider farm cluster area. And I said that the farm carbon, DEFRA are developing a tool. There are 3 kind of tools available for farmers to use already. And our farmers felt that it's very important to make a start. So it doesn't really matter which tool you use, as long as you use the same tool. So in every 3 to 5 years, or they might do it more frequently. They might want to do it every year if they're making changes. They can review and see what changes they've made to their cropping or to hedge planting, and see how that's benefiting their carbon balance. And farm carbon accounting also links to soil health. And it's been said that we actually know more about the moon than we do about soil health. It's an incredibly complex system, and it really needs nurturing and preserving and benefiting. So the Royal Agricultural University, Cirencester, they've done some research, and just as a kind of figure, a hectare of grassland might support 50 tonnes of soil fauna, and that's everything from microscopic fungi through to beetles to earthworms. that are all really active 24/7 in aerating the soil, bringing improving the structure, improving its water holding capacity, which then links into our water health, improving its nutrient holding capacity, so it's more resistant to drought stress, it's more resistant to periods of heavy rainfall, which are all things that we're going to be experiencing as climate changes. And I think we'll see changes in agricultural systems. So the picture here is of cattle grazing a herbal ley, which is a mixture of about 18 different species that are sown after an arable crop, including things like chicory, which are really deep rooting, and they really begin to benefit the soil structure. And several of our farmers are beginning to explore regenerative agriculture, and I think you will see, I'd really like to be able to kind of skip forward 10 years and just see what the landscape's looking like. But my prediction is in the Dedham Vale, we're going to be seeing more livestock, because it's showing that they're going to be such an important part of maintaining soil health, fertility. Fertilizer that comes out the backside of an animal is so readily available to soil microbes compared to artificial fertilizer, and you've got cost implications, although there are huge cost implications of buying the stock in the first place.
Fiona, it's Simon here. You've got about 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, yeah. Agroforestry, again, I think that might be a challenge to see how that might fit into our Dedham Vale landscape. But again, it's something that's been looked at, where you're growing rows of trees and cropping in between. We've also had a Hedgerow Heroes project last year, where we gapped up and created new wildlife corridors, and we've got the funding again for that this year. So that was across 12 farms last year. Hopefully we'll be expanding that with new farms this year. And just as an kind of idea of how things like the Hedgerow Heroes project links into climate change, improving your hedge management from a really heavily managed hedge like the picture on the left to one that's allowed to be free growing, and perhaps adding a flower rich margin, then you're sequestering another 3.5 to 3.7 tonnes per kilometre of hedge. So it can make a real benefit and bonus to that. Opportunities for involvement. We welcome volunteers on the project, and so if you have a look, we're working very closely with the AONB, so there's potential to link into that. So I hope to see some of you on farm in due course. Thank you, Simon and Nigel.
Thank you very much, Fiona. That was absolutely fascinating. I mean, the complexity there was in your sort of introductory words, and then the sort of simplicity of some of the other information later is sort of the wonderful contrast of farming today, I guess, and farming in the climate change environment. I think one quick thing I will say, I believe, Simon, we have been recording this evening, so there will be presentations hopefully on the website in due course. I think I'm right in saying that. Simon's nodding. So thank you very much, Fiona. Simon, presume you've got some questions.
Yep, just a couple of questions. And Nigel, you look like you're in a sauna. I don't know whether you've got some.
The light was on.
Okay. One question is, you've talked about a lot of change and stuff, and yeah, in your experience, Fiona, have you ever seen so much change in agricultural policy?
No, I don't think I have, because I guess if I'd have been around in the 60s and 70s, when I started working in farm conservation in 1986, and I think just a couple of years before that, it was just the end of the old Ministry of Agriculture grants, when farmers were being paid to fill in their ponds and take out their hedges. To the following year, suddenly there was a new grant available for creating ponds. But it wasn't, so there was that kind of shift, but there wasn't the monumental scale of change that we're going to be seeing coming up.
And just one final question before I hand back to Nigel to introduce our next speaker. Yeah, and I suppose, yeah, from a personal point of view as well, a lot of farmers I talk to, they really want to do the right thing. We've seen, is it Wild East talking about trying to give over some land to nature conservation? There are some incentives to do that, perhaps not enough in my view. But is it your feeling that farmers and landowners do want to do something for the environment?
Definitely. And I think there isn't a one size fits all for every farmer. So you might see some farmers giving over some land for, say, creating new woodland or something like that, that you might think is a very visible, oh, that farmer's doing something really brilliant. But the next door farmer, the thing that floats his boat might be something like the regenerative agriculture, and he might be really working to improve his soil health. So I think it's horses for courses, but yes, everybody, all the farmers I work with, it's a great industry to be working in. They're all really so keen and interested.
Yeah, thanks very much, Fiona. So I'm just going to hand back to Nigel, but just in one word, would you be happy for us to share your slides with those in attendance today?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on. Our next speaker, I'm sure he almost needs no introduction. He's a resident of the Valley, which is always a good start. A resident of AONB indeed. It's Jules Pretty. I think he's got a new book coming out, I'm told, called Sea Sagas of the North. I believe that's already published, or it's about to be published, one or the other. But we look forward to that, Jules. We know you very much over the years. The East Country was another one of your wonderful books, and you were talking about regenerative agriculture before anybody really had heard about it. So you've got quite a background in all this particular subject. I think it's one of your specialities. Certainly, I heard you speaking on a particular subject. You'll be on the agenda today a few weeks ago. So I'll hand over to you now, if I may, to talk to us about personal carbon footprints.
Thanks very much indeed, Nigel. And hello, everybody. Thanks a lot. Yes, 1995, I wrote a book on regenerative agriculture. So it's taken a while to kind of come round to us all. Hello, everyone. I'd love to say nice to see you, but in this format, we can't see anybody. We just have to assume that that everybody's well at the other end of the line. So I've been asked to talk about the climate crisis, and this kind of feeds into what Fiona was just saying about cutting and capturing carbon. I'm doing this not just around farms. I'm doing it for kind of us as residents, householders of such places as AONBs, but there's also a little bit about what farmers can do in terms of the challenge here. So I'm setting the scene to begin with. Can I just double check, Nigel, Simon, you can see the screen?
I can see the screen, yes.
We can see the screen, and just while I've got your attention, if anyone has got questions, please use the Q&A button at the top of your screen.
Super.
Thanks, Jules.
Oh, lovely, thank you very much, and jump in if there's anything that needs to be said. So so we're setting the scene around the kind of climate crisis and what it means for us in the Valley and Vale, and actually for wider landscapes as well. So let's just have a look at setting the scene. This is carbon emissions per person by a selection of countries in the world since kind of advent of industrialization. Sharp increases, some recent tipping over with investments in renewables, but the world figure, and this is carbon rather than carbon dioxide equivalent, so it doesn't count the methane and the nitrous oxide because the records don't go that far back. But you can see the world one is the black line. This is carbon per person. So we're about 5 tons of carbon per person worldwide. We're about 7 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And I'll show you some figures as to kind of where that's going. So there's a long historic area under each of those graphs of carbon that we've simply put into the atmosphere. The number of occasions that we hear that extraordinary weather events are happening are increasing year on year. And it's very tempting to think that this problem is about weather. And I'm going to make a point about that in just a moment. Death Valley on the top left, the hottest ever temperature recorded on the planet in our kind of era, geological era, 56 degrees last summer. Wildfires, burning of the permafrost in Siberia, melting of the cryosphere, ice all over the world in retreat. So we're seeing these kind of signals, but very often they're kind of happening in remoter places where it's kind of easy to pretend that they're not happening. Two big events in the last year, the COP26 in Glasgow, and then the IPCC's sixth big report that came out a month and a half ago. Now, I'm an IPCC reviewer, so I could see how this was changing over the course of the last couple of years as the science was looking at the evidence worldwide, and it's a bit scary. We're now at 1.2 degrees centigrade above that pre-industrial level of 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Just a reminder of how quickly this has happened. 1990, a generation ago, it was 350 parts per million, which is widely accepted as the safe place for humanity, 350 parts per million. We're at 417 in the early part of this year, and then super scarily last week, the first measures at Mauna Loa in Hawaii of 420 plus parts per million. So in 32 years, it's gone up 70 parts per million, and that's just super scary, really. So we're trying to limit the increase between 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade. At the COP, the nationally determined commitments, the NDCs, that governments did sign up to, if they're all implemented, then they will still lead to an increase of 2.4 degrees, which is non-survivable, as you'll see in a minute. So there were some good outcomes. Taking action on methane, electric vehicles, deforestation, planting trees, green finance, almost an agreement to leave fossil fuels in the ground, but that didn't happen. People blinked at the last minute. But what we do know is that we need to cut emissions by 50% in this decade, then another 50% in the next decade, then another 50%. And if we can do that by 2050, 50% cuts, we actually get to a place that is safe for humanity. And the phrase that people have been using is we're trying to keep 1.5 degrees alive. Recently, this is the author André Sneer Magnusson from Iceland. He stood to be president. He was unsuccessful, stood as a Green a few years ago. And he posed a question. He said recently, how do you say goodbye to a glacier? If you look on the right hand side there, the picture at the top is 1990 of the Langjökull, one of the really big glaciers as high as Ben Nevis, more than 500 meters deep in terms of ice at various points. And at the bottom left is the Ökjökull that was there in 1990. And as you can see in the bottom picture, the most latest satellite photograph shows that the Ökjökull has disappeared. And as he said, the glacier is not okay, it's disappeared and is not coming back. So we're in this stage where we're beginning to see tipping points and cascades happening. And this is the one actually that really worries me the most, the glaciers. This is Rakaposhi in the Himalayas. There are 46,000 glaciers in the Himalayas, stretching right from kind of Afghanistan right across to Burma and then into China. The 46,000 glaciers in the Himalaya feed the great rivers, the Indus, which is this picture here, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, and the Yangtze those glaciers provide for free 1.3 billion people with drinking water. At over 2 degrees centigrade, not even that 2.4 that I've just mentioned that we signed up to last year, between 60 and 90% of the glaciers completely disappear. And we don't have an economic model for supplying free drinking water to a fifth of the world's population, the 1.3 billion people. And this is to make the point that climate crisis is not about weather. It's not even actually about extremes. It is about economic disruption of the highest kind of level. And that is the sort of thing that we should just be bearing in mind. If this were to happen between now and 2050, then all those people would have to leave South Asia and Southeast Asia and West China and go somewhere else. And we don't have a model for doing that. So it's an economic problem that we face. Let's come back to the valley then. So what's this mean for us, for the valley and the Vale? Spring comes, reminder of just the gorgeous landscapes. No wonder it's a place of outstanding beauty. Summer also a reminder of the wind power that drove our transport in the past, of the places we can walk and visit, the great landscapes of the region. We come into autumn, late summer and autumn, and the harvest are coming, and then we're getting the kind of light and the clear light of late autumn. And then sometimes, occasionally, we get these things, snow events in winter. Winters have just about disappeared. We occasionally get 1 or 2 days, maybe 3 or 4, but the days, the years of long cold events have now pretty well disappeared. And as you recall from this latest winter, non-existent effectively. So we are seeing the changes. We are seeing the flood events in the valley, the kind of signifiers of where things are definitely going wrong. But I also want to make the point, and Fiona made this point as well, that good things sit alongside bad. So there are, in my own garden here, stag beetles flying every evening at the moment. There's been the return of buzzards and red kites in this picture here. We can see all sorts of good things that sit alongside these kind of deep concerns. They don't hide them, but they give us indicators of what we can be doing to our landscapes to protect them. That won't be enough because we'll need to make changes to our actual emissions as well. But actually, it's a pretty good grounds for making systemic change of the sort that we need. So a couple more bits of numbers here. The climate crisis, we emit 53 gigatons, that's billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, about 7 tons a person. If you just kind of hold that figure in your head, about 7 tons. In the UK, it's 7.5 tons, 7.7 tons. And we can measure this in a different way through carbon or carbon dioxide equivalent, as I've mentioned. We could measure just by countries within the countries, or we can measure by supply chains. If we wanted to know our true impact in the UK, we really should measure the impact of cutting down forests in Amazonia to grow soya, which is then fed to livestock, which we eat in this country. That's the full kind of supply chain. But normally we speak of what's happening within our boundaries, our borders. So I'm sticking to that kind of angle for the moment. What really matters is that we've only got one system. We've got 220 countries, but actually one system of the planet is the one that matters. And we've got to somehow get us back to 350 parts per million. Second big number, 1 ton per person worldwide does it. That gets us there. That gets us to a safe place. And I've shown these 2 pictures. These are the 222 countries of the world. On the left side, carbon, the right side, carbon dioxide equivalent. The blue dots are the countries that currently produce or emit less than 1 ton per person. Those are the poorest countries in the world. They need to increase their consumption in order to escape poverty, hunger, lack of clean water, lack of transport, lack of safety, security, education. whole range of things that we take to be completely kind of basic essentials. So parts of the world need to increase consumption that results in carbon dioxide, but everybody else needs to reduce. So you can think of this as being a tipping of this curve. Some of those red dots towards the top of the picture are countries that are producing more than 50 tons per person. So the poorest countries are producing 1. Some of the richest are producing more than 50. So 80% of the world population, about that sort of number, 80-20, needs to reduce carbon emissions, and we're in that category. I should say that we can also look at the variation of carbon profiles within countries. The rich tend to have much higher carbon profiles, almost all from consumption of goods and from transport and international transport. So again, poverty is not the answer to the climate crisis, but it's a signifier of where people are going to need to consume more, and the wealthy and the rich and affluent are going to need to do more work, which the leaflet that you've already had is the indicator. Just coming to that. Here's an analogy for you. It's one that I often use. The problem with the climate crisis, if I say to you, as I did, we've increased by 1.2 degrees the temperature of the planet, it doesn't sound like much. I mean, it's hot now. It's going to be 31 on Friday. It was 9 degrees this morning. Each day could be varying 10 or 15 or 20 degrees. What's the problem with 1 degree? You might think. Well, think not of weather. Think not of those sorts of variations, but think of our body temperature. The Earth and our bodies are homeostatic. In other words, when they go out of sync, they are brought back to stability by the action of the body. So when we are at +1 degree, we know we are not well. We've got a fever. At +2 degrees, the fever is serious. At +3, we start to suffer organ and structural damage. We're certainly heading for hospital. At +4, death will follow. Now, you may have heard, and I can point towards them, people still talking calmly of Earth increases of +2 to +4 degrees being possible, likely, being livable in the course of this century. They are not, because we will get what are called cascade effects, crashes, thresholds happening, and change suddenly accelerating, as it does to our bodies when we hit 3 degrees or 4 degrees. And if you get structural damage, you're not going back to a safe place. So we're on that edge of fever seriousness at the moment. So think of that as being what's happened to the Earth. It's been pushed away from stability. Now, what can we do about it? Well, I've been working on this idea of 30 for 30, a campaign around 30 ideas to reduce your carbon footprint, your carbon profile. As I've mentioned, and as I'm not sure if you can actually see me or you can only see the slide, so I'll just kind of wave the leaflet in front of my face here. This is the one that was sent to you before the meeting. This makes the point that our average is 7.7 tons per year. We need to get to 1. Can you do that by 2030? That would be a really big change. But can you at least get 50% of the way there? Because that will be on target to make that change. And the principle here is kind of simple. We don't need to do all these things. So start where you feel comfortable. And then after a year, select another thing, but vitally tell other people, because this doesn't work unless we have a kind of the grandest, greatest collective action project that the world has ever seen. So if you feel you can do something about diet, meat is the problematic part of the carbon equivalent climate crisis profile from food. If you can do something about that, great. Vegetarian diet will save you between 0.6 and 0.7 of a ton per year. Maybe you just go 2 meat-free days. If you only eat sustainable and organic foods, about half a ton. Very local, completely local foods would get you between 0.3 and 0.4. So you can see in the orange some food options. The blue is then energy and home, installing solar panels, heat pumps, big benefit from switching electricity to guaranteed renewable sources. You're going to hit 1.6 tons straight away. I know this is super uncomfortable at the moment because prices are going through the ceiling for everybody, but if you can make that switch to renewable sources, you know you're going to be making a difference on this. Transport's in red. The replacing your fossil fuel car with an electric vehicle will save about 2 tons a year. If you just go car free, or you live in a city where you can use public transport and you don't need a car, that's going to save 2 tons. Flights, the pink, those are in effect negatives, because one return flight between London and New York or London and Dubai will cost you 1.9 tons. So you can do all that really good work and you blow a great big hole in it with international travel. We're not going to see renewable sources of kerosene for planes before 2035, possibly 2040. So we can go back to flying when they have renewable sources of fuel, but for the moment it should just be occasional. I'm definitely not saying don't go, because we need holidays and we need to go to places, and interaction between cultures and places is really important, but we might have to do some more work in some of these other areas. Some yellow ones there from recycling. The Wear Me 30 times movement is fantastic, where people commit to not disposing of clothing until they've worn it 30 times. That's only going to get you 0.2 and a bit of a ton. Working from home is a good one. That makes a big difference because that's cutting down transport. And then planting trees also helpful, but a small benefit on this picture for each of us. So pick one if you can, stick to it and go with it. And if you don't want to do some of those, there's plenty of room amongst the 30 options to try to pick other ones. So I'm hoping that we can kind of get to a stage where we're taking collective action within parishes, towns, boroughs, districts, counties, AONBs, where we're making these kinds of differences. Now, on the other side, as Fiona was saying, we can also look at ways of actually capturing carbon. And this is the big benefit that comes from agricultural systems. They can make a contribution. I'm involved with some international groups advising on this, trying to get change across large numbers of countries. We reckon we could probably capture 10 gigatons per year worldwide. That's 10 of the 53 that we need to cut. So just as a general principle, that fits this 80-20 model. We need to cut emissions by 80%, and we could do 20% of the difference through carbon capture. Lots of terms for agriculture. I like the broad church here of all sorts of different terminology. We don't need to stick to one, but we do need to be thinking about how to replace ploughing with no-till systems, to create complex rotations and patterns, and to add organic matter to the soil to create that soil health, which holds the carbon. That's where we get the greatest benefit, turning soil into a place that holds carbon and doesn't emit it. And here's another similar diagram. This is the sort of thing that's used in the carbon accounting, again, that Fiona was talking about just now, that shifts, these are per hectare, per year benefits, shifts of agriculture into zero-till, residue retention, cover crops, through to agroforestry, silvopasture, rotational grazing, and so forth. Excuse me, a whole range of benefits that if you could do 2 or 3 of those, you'd be hitting about a ton per hectare per year of carbon being captured. So the land can do quite a lot to help the householders, the individuals, us as residents, to make the changes in emissions, and the land can do an additional bit to make the changes into capture systems rather than net emitters. That's the challenge in a nutshell. Where does this leave us? The UN climate change, the system there has a very good campaign called Race to Zero. A large number of so-called real economy actors, cities, regions, businesses, investors, higher education institutions, making a commitment to cut their emissions by 50% by 2030. In the short term, It's emissions cuts that will deliver the benefit. In the long term, we create more regenerative systems through carbon capture. If we just stuck to carbon sequestration, it kind of lets the polluters off the hook. We don't want to do that. We need to be saying cut emissions, get rid of fossil fuels out of our economies completely, make the shift to renewable systems, and then capture carbon as well at the same time. And that gives us a tiny window, a window of hope. Some of you will know that I'm chair of the Essex Climate Action Commission. We produced a report called Net Zero, Making the County Carbon Neutral last year with 100+ recommendations. Wonderful that unanimous cross-party support in the county was given in December to all of those recommendations. And the exam question that I keep setting our colleagues is, look, this is one county with 1.6 million people, 200,000 businesses, 275 parish councils, 450 schools. How do we reach everybody? And it's not until we have a saturation effect that we reach everybody in each of our areas of interest, in the AONB, all those farmers, all the residents of the valley, all the local residents, the new city of Colchester. How do we get all of that making these kinds of changes? Because unless we do, we go above 2 degrees and then we head for more and it's too late. So we're just in the window where we've got changes possible. Well, again, Fiona mentioned the range of bills. Actually, the Environment Bill was the first time for 30 years we've had a government bill and act that looked out 25 years. Amazing, really. Very, very encouraging. And so we've got some looking long distance, which is good. We've got some place-based actions. And I'm counting up now the number of local actions by town councils and parishes who are forming their own climate crisis or climate action committees. If we can get this to local level, I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if every parish in the Valley and Vale, in the wider area, not just the AONB part, but the whole of the region, could form their own climate action commissions or committees to start to create the collective action for this. So let me finish then with 2 quotes. This is the wonderful poet, American poet, Mary Oliver, died 3 years ago. She wrote a small poem called Instructions for Living a Life. She said, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. So be astonished by this world out there that we wish to protect, this beautiful valley, the pictures I showed you about it, but above all, tell someone else so that we can create the collective action that makes it work. And Emily Dickinson, another American poet who was an amazing recluse, to be able to write in such a fantastic way about nature and environments. She said, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. And by that she meant be a kind of trickster, so you can get people in the game and starting to change what they think and what they do. And we have a chance of getting this right. So I finished with some kind of unadorned self-promotion. Well, Nigel mentioned the book. Sea Sagas of the North is my new one. There is an early bird offer at the Hawthorne Press website. As you can see there, stories and tales about the North Sea and North Atlantic, which echo some of my other regional books from the past. So thank you very much, everybody. And that takes us just bang on time by the looks of it. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Jules. That's absolutely brilliant. As ever, great deal of food for thought there. Very challenging. I think we all need you on our shoulders to keep on nagging at us to do all these things, both personally and in the wider areas that we live. So thank you very much for that. Okay, Simon, have you got some questions for Jules?
Yeah, thanks very much, Jules. And I will further plug your books because I've read a couple of them, the East Country and the Luminous Coast, and a really fantastic read. And I would also suggest any of you that do Twitter or just occasionally look at Twitter, do follow Jules, because I think it's every day there is an inspiring little message from Jules. I don't know whether they're quotes from his books, but it's well worth following. So onto the questions. The first one is sort of amalgamation of a couple of questions. Many people on this call will care very much about what Fiona and you have said, Jules, but there's probably a significant proportion of the population that don't care. Those people reading news headlines around Ukraine, around pylons coming across the AONB and Stour Valley, about going back to imperial from decimal. What would your view be about? What would you suggest about how do we engage those people?
Yeah, I think that I mean that's that's the nub of the question, really. That is actually what it's all about. I think I'd make kind of two observations for people under under 25 years of age. The 90% of young people say that the climate crisis is their most highest priority, their greatest concern, their greatest source of anxiety. So we have a cohort of people who kind of see this, understand it, dismayed that the older generations, us, have failed to get rid of this problem, has laid it at their door. In 10 years' time, they're going to be in the middle of organizations, and in 10 years after that, they may be leading them. I doubt whether their views are going to change. So we will see a change, a natural change in the way that people see the climate crisis and the opportunities that come from that for creating a kind of more regenerative cultures. But that still leaves us with the challenge now at this point. And I genuinely think that the best way to do this is through local action, through local groups, because people can have differences in views, political views or other kind of views, but they can still work together to solve a common problem. So I'm trying to create a kind of language that says, this is serious, but I'm not a doom monger. I think that my glass is well above half full, because I think we still have an opportunity to get it right. And if you can get local groups saying, we're going to work together on this in the way that people all over the country did this for the Jubilee weekend, well, we need that sort of action. And if you have that, then I think people can look across the divides that tend to split us and try to look for ways to bring people together and say, this is a common problem. The fossil fuels will disappear before long. We will not be burning them in vehicles by 2030. We will all have electric vehicles because that's all that will be permitted. This will have a major impact upon air pollution. We will see benefits come, the so-called co-benefits of these changes will come along and help us. We can't sit and wait for that and just hope someone else does it. We've got to kind of tell it slant, as I said with Emily Dickinson, and try and encourage others to join the fray. If we can get the 80-20 model, if we can get 80% of people doing it, actually, that's probably fine. That would solve the problem.
Yeah, I absolutely concur around, we need to sell that positive vision of the future and not just that doom mongering. Turning to another question, how can we square the circle of generating personal CO2 emission reductions by going vegetarian while simultaneously generating agricultural emission reductions by converting arable to pasture?
Well, I'd kind of make two points. The greatest problem coming from the meat bit of the diet component of carbon comes from intensive livestock production. It comes from the really big units that we don't see in this region. They're not here, but they are in other places. And when I've seen them with tens of thousands of animals in factory spaces, particularly in the US, but also in Southern America as well, they are just awful. And they use soya and other compounds as input for feed. They're terribly inefficient. And then we eat the meat, and that's really bad. So if we could get rid of that part of the system, we could still have quite successful, diverse agricultural systems that involve grass-fed animals. So I tend to kind of say, if you can make the choice about cutting meat, and I speak as a vegetarian, having done that already for some time, I'm comfortable with that. But if people want to eat meat, I'd say choose grass-fed, please, because that makes the big difference. Try to get away from the intensive stuff, because not only is that horrible for the animals themselves, but it's also pretty much the major driver of the carbon profile within diets. So that would get us most of the way there. So I think we can have our cake and eat it in that sense.
I'm just going to ask one more question because it came from Councillor Finch, who asked a question of the previous speaker and I didn't get a chance to put it. But if you can keep your answer fairly brief, Jules, because we want to keep to time. How is farming going to change in the valley? Can we grow our root crops at a farm scale level? Minimum tillage and direct drilling has been around since the 60s. Why so long? And how can we do this now successfully? Direct drilling is brilliant for soil structure.
Absolutely, a good question, James. I very simply, where is it going? It's going to be more diverse. We're going to grow more things. We're going to have more wildlife in agriculture. It's going to be more mixed. We're going to have less in the way of ploughing. It was a mistake 10,000 years ago to invent ploughing. Now we realize that. It's taken us a long time to realize that. We need to go to systems that are zero till, no till, conservation agriculture, where we actually look after the soil, because that is the kind of fundamental to human health as well as agricultural health. So that's the kind of changes we'll see. They will be positive for the landscape and they'll be positive for health as well.
Thanks very much. I'm going to hand back to Nigel to introduce the breakout sessions. But just to say, I think we sent out the 30 for 30 leaflet with delegates, but we will resend it with Fiona's presentation. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Thank you again, Jules. That's absolutely brilliant. Okay, we traditionally in our forums we have site visits, because we have got those this year, but they will be happening over the next couple of 3 weeks. So I hope everybody's indicated which of those they want to go on to us. But this year we have got these breakout sessions, which I think are always a very interesting way of taking things forward in group discussions. Hopefully everybody's indicated which group they want to go into, and shortly the team will be putting people together in those groups.
Nigel, could I just jump in that? Jules, could you just stop sharing your screen?
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, has that done it? Yep.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Apologies.
So the three topics are farming and protected landscapes programme and climate change, the links between climate change and wildlife loss, and the one that really follows on quite closely from what we've just heard, AONB team pledges, offers of pledges, and how the AONB might be able to help. And I think that one's particularly telling, isn't it? So, right, I pause here now, I think, and people will be put into their sessions. We'll all come back in about a quarter of an hour. We'll have some feedback from those particular individual sessions. So let the magic begin.
Yeah, I think we just have to be patient for half a minute or so, and then we will automatically be put into sessions. If there's anyone still here that was looking to go into a breakout session, if they can put something in the Q&A chat. And the options are farming and protected landscapes, link between climate crisis and wildlife, AONB actions. So farming, climate crisis, or actions. Yeah, just to say again, if anyone's still in the main forum, if they put in the Q&A, which is towards the top of the screen, which breakout session they would want to be in, and the options are farming and protected landscapes, climate crisis and wildlife loss, that's climate, or A and B actions.
Oh, crikey.
I think I can welcome everybody back, can I? I think everybody's rejoined us. I did disappear from my broadband connection, went down, so I missed my my slot. But anyway, let's have some feedback briefly. So let's start with the farming protected landscapes. I think Alex or Lynn. Alex, are you kicking this one off? Or Lynn?
I think I am.
Lynn was going to say a few words. Lynn, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Lynn Eldrett. I work with Alex Stinsdale on farming and protected landscapes. So in our breakout session, Alex briefly outlined the farming and protected landscapes programme and the fact that it's a project-driven environmental scheme covering projects for farmers and landowners that benefit 4 themes. It's climate, nature, people and places. And we had an interesting discussion. A couple of the points raised just quickly really was how can we still grow a lot of the crops which we grow in Dedham Vale, which are root-based crops like beets, potatoes and carrots, and they need tillage. How do we manage that? And we spoke about the issues around supermarkets wanting cosmetic pretty vegetables and the fact that equipment is now more available to actually grow these without a certain amount of tillage in terms of planting, but then the harvesting obviously does require us to till the land. And other points which were raised, which were the need to increase local growth of fruit so that we don't have to import as much fruit. And there's a lot of work being done in Dedham Vale in that respect. So it's something which we're able to have an impact on, and we are doing through the FIPL programme. And we also spoke about the conflicting interests of growing our own food versus importing it from other countries who might be able to grow it more efficiently rather than us using meadowland, for example, which might not be an efficient way of using that land in our Dedham Vale. And so that's just a quick summary of our discussions in our breakout session.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And the link between climate crisis and wildlife loss is that Claire?
It is indeed.
I can see you there, Claire.
Thank you. Yes. So Alex Mordeluz, our AONB Nature Recovery Officer, gave us a great overview of some of the nature in Dedham Vale and how it's been affected. So we talked through effects on woodlands, effects on ancient trees, on hedgerows, on meadows, on rivers and streams, as well as the wildlife within them. And then went on to talk about some of the non-native species that are changing with our climate. Then we looked at one species in particular, so the dormouse, the flagship species for nature recovery in Dedham Vale, and some of its vulnerabilities, whether that's about changing temperatures or changing food sources. And then he finished off his bit about talking about what the AONB was doing with landowners. So that could be riverside tree planting, natural regeneration, river restoration, and natural flood management. And then I talked very quickly about some of the effects of renewable energies. And then we had a couple of questions, one about bees, and then our time went so fast, we're in the middle of an answer to Tom about hedgerow planting and how the landowners viewed it, which was, in summary, entirely positive. So that was our group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And Paula or Oka from the AONB Action individual pledges, which is one I wanted to join but failed miserably. Over to you.
Thanks, Nigel. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the sort of national picture and the fact that we're part of a family of AONBs and what we are collectively doing and the pledges that have been made nationally to, to create some positive action across the AONB network as far as climate change mitigation is concerned. And then brought that very much down to how we're trying to build community capacity to, to inspire action locally. This can all be very overwhelming, the whole topic of climate change. And I think the more we're able to provide some practical suggestions and opportunities for communities to get involved, the better. And that leads us on to the grant opportunities. And Oka, as our grants officer, was able to talk a bit about the the pot of money that is available in the Dedham Vale AOMB and in the Stour Valley to support activity around climate change mitigation, as well as lots of other good works, and some really good examples of projects that we've seen happen. And sorry to Jackie, because we didn't get a chance to respond to your question, but we will come back to you. And that's really, it was about how can we all contribute to some sort of monitoring about what action is going on across the area, you know, whether it's community action, individual action, or organisations, to show that we are actually moving in the right direction as far as climate change mitigation is concerned.
Thank you very much, Paula. That's some good stuff going on in all three of those outbreaks groups. I think Simon wants to come in here. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Just before you bring the proceedings to a close, I'm sure you will as well, Nigel, but I think the whole AOMB team are very appreciative of the speakers giving up their time and energy to present what I thought was two really thought-provoking presentations. After today's event, we will be sending out a questionnaire about how you found this evening. It'll be very short, but it would be really helpful for us if you could fill that in, because obviously this, we've gone online for this version, and gone for a different time, so we'd really value your thoughts on that. We may even find the energy to do a calculation about how much carbon we've saved by doing it this way. So yeah, I'm going to hand back to you, Nigel, to close proceedings, and hopefully you'll be short enough so we can get to the cricket highlights.
Absolutely right. Yes, I agree with that one. Okay, well, thanks very much, Simon. And really the main thing I want to say is to echo your thanks to the speakers for two stimulating talks to us. Thank you, everybody who attended. And also thank you to the team for doing all they've done to put the whole evening together. And if I can remind everybody of your request that we do feedback information, because it's quite vital. Now we're doing these things differently. We do understand how people see them and how they react with them. So it's important if you can just have that feedback. I hope everybody did take something away from this. I certainly have. I mean, I'm trying to work out what I don't seem to have done terribly much in the last 3 or 4 years, but there must be something I can do to try and to support Jules' plan. So I will take that away and make some thoughts on that. And I think the 3 briefing sessions we had, I mean, some interesting things there. That the one I really want to take back, I think, and I'd quite like to see that in some way, is if the AOMB can influence villages and parishes and that sort of thing. I think that's a good level for us to work at. Now, I know several of my villages are working with sustainability and that sort of thing. And I think there could be quite a lot of good things we could do there at that level to support what they are doing, and also to get that message into those communities. So personally, I'd like to take that one away, if I may, somehow, and see what we can do about that. So final thing, just to remind you about the site visits coming up over the next couple of weeks. We look forward to seeing you on those. I hope to get to all of them myself. And on that note, it's almost 7:30. I will thank you all very much for attending. Thank you for your contributions, and wish you all a very good evening.